Okay, yeah, before we start, I just wanted to clarify something from what I said last time. Obviously, when I said to clean it with a brush, I didn't mean this kind of brush, like a dustpan brush, because that's a bit too finicky. What you need is something like an artist brush, something like this. Obviously, a brand new one. This has been used before to clean, but that's all it's been used is to just clean the dust from certain areas, because sometimes a vacuum or using canned air isn't enough. Sometimes there's a bit of static or whatever holding the dust on the side of it, and obviously using one of these is just easier. It's like a mini sweeping brush, but obviously sometimes it gets trapped in the fibres. You have to remove all of that, dispose of that safely. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Obviously, I didn't think you'd actually use one of these, but for those that did think I meant that, I don't. Um, but all jokes aside, serious little point I just wanted to make. Originally, these came with, I think it was the Light Scribe CD uh, player and burner in one. So the thing about it was that it would burn to the light sensitive discs, and you could actually use it to print directly on the discs. Um, I don't know if they still do those things. Some of them looked okay, but I never really used that. But anyway, it had been used to play a lot of films and things like that, and a lot of music, especially over the years. And that eventually failed. So a lot of you will probably be wondering, can you swap out the CD writer? Well, yes, you can. Um, Here's the thing. This is another CD DVD, because that's actually, it does DVD as well. But the thing about it is that the connections on the new devices are all SATA rated, so their power is SATA, and there is the SATA lead coming out of it. Whereas this is running on the old ribbon. Now, because that would cause a conflict, because it actually shares the same IDE slot, I believe. The thing about connecting this now to that, this becomes unusable. I'm going to actually have to replace this at some point. But for the time being, I've just left this in here because it's not really connected to anything. It shouldn't cause any interrupt requests, rather than just unplug it. But if you're going to replace these, I would suggest you replace both of them, because you've got space there. Or you could even put in a 3.5 hard disk bay in there, saturated, and then you can have removable hard drives. So you can just plug one in, put what you want on it, and then remove it, and do it that way if you wanted to do that. I mean, is that the way forward now? It seems DVDs are old fashioned these days, but obviously, just turn it so you can see. I don't know if you can see, but not really. It's a bit dark in there. I haven't got a torch to hand, but anyway, yeah. So the new DVD writer is obviously a SATA rated, so that is not compatible with what was originally in these, which was on the old ribbon that's connected to the motherboard, and then you would have your master, how they had it wired, master being at the top, and then the slave, to which was the light scribe. But like I say, that failed. The other one still works, but because to have this on this cable would cause a conflict in the IDE and information. There's probably a way around it, with hacking in your software and things like that. But in general, you don't really want to mess about with the parameters. XP, if it's an XP system that you're using, and I'm assuming it is. I think these came preloaded with XP at the time, and it's quite stable, especially if you're using it for things like music. It's not so much for video, because obviously video was advanced quite a lot, but if you're a person who's old school and you have been doing this for a long time, we don't necessarily chase all the latest fashions just to upgrade when a machine that is perfectly fine and does the job perfectly well. The other thing is that between 32-bit and 64-bit music, the quality of the music generally is imperceivable. Most people don't perceive the difference between music that was made on a 64-bit system, because a lot of the resources that are used to drive the bit depth of such a system, and usually it's to do with graphics as well, although the graphics card handles most of that processing. The system itself has to be compatible. And think about XP standard version anyway, is that it runs at 32-bit, and that's why it's quite stable, because the numbers of calculations that it's performing for the processor doesn't overburden or overtax the system, especially on the original memory that was installed, which was 2 pieces of 512 megabytes, adding up to the roughly 1 gigabyte. Although there's always some resources that are being used, so you don't get the full use of any of the components. There's always a slight reserve, but it's close enough that they'll market it and tell you that it's 1 gigabyte and so on and so forth. But yeah, before I digress, I lose the point that I'm making. Yeah, so it is possible to replace the CD or DVD. It'll be DVD these days. Nobody bothers with CD, because obviously a DVD player can play CDs as well. So it's possible to replace it with a modern DVD writer, but obviously even 2 writers, but those run on SATA. Obviously you have the relevant cables. Now, originally only the hard drives was running on the SATA. And so these cables here now, these ones here, now connect to the hard drives, and one of them obviously connects up here to the DVD. So if you get another one, you actually have a slot on the motherboard expansion. You have 4 reserved slot. So they call it RAID on the old system, and you may have to go into your blue BIOS screen to actually turn it on. Depends on how your system was originally set up, but mine's all set up so that they're actually functioning. So all I do is plug the cable in, and then the motherboard will automatically recognize and install relevant drivers and software, etc., to run that. And obviously if they require that it comes with a CD, that's why it's always best to buy new if you can, and keep hold of the discs, things like that, because you never know when you're going to be using them again. Even when things get upgraded, it's always good to be able to go back to a previous version, because there's certain functionality, such as, like I say, with 32-bit and 64-bit, although it's moved on a lot more since then, the actual ability for people to perceive how that music was made and to improve the quality is relatively negligible. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that would probably disagree with that, because they'd be talking about the sample rates and things like that, which obviously increases the fidelity or the resolution, if you will, of the way the music is recorded in samples per second, especially in the high frequencies. For those of you that know music and understand it, there's obviously for sample rates being set, usually say CD 44.1 kilohertz, which is actually 44,100 samples per second. When you are entering into frequency ranges of 15 kilohertz and above, basically do the maths, divide 44,100 by 15,000, and you're only getting three steps to represent that frequency, which basically it's not a sine wave anymore, it's a sawtooth wave, if that, or square wave. And obviously that's why you have this thing called liaising. And obviously CD, the format that it's at currently, is still 44.1, although you have the higher definition stuff coming on Blu-ray. Usually DVD is 48 kilohertz, which is still 48,000. And if you divide the 15,000 hertz or 15 kilohertz into that, then again you're getting roughly three samples to represent a 15 kilohertz frequency, which is not going to sound nice. This is why the higher frequencies in CDs aren't as nice as the higher frequencies on a vinyl record, because obviously what vinyl is it's atomic and molecular, and the music has been molded in a naturalistic way, if you will, using a higher fidelity, whereas CD isn't able to do that, just simply because the resolution would have to be so much higher to make those frequencies be captured digitally. That's how it records in samples per second. So those of you who understand sound engineering, you understand where I'm coming from there. So yeah, so between 64-bit and 32-bit, that's not really that much of a drastic increase that you're going to perceivably notice. The high frequencies, especially the fidelity, the definition of the frequencies, to be vastly improved upon. So until we start getting to, terabyte systems, which literally are running, millions and trillions of calculations per second and catching sample rates literally at a molecular level, because that would be the limit, atomic level and molecular level, unless you're going to go into quantum music, where music is recorded on a quantum level using electrons, and maybe that's possible at some stage in the future, but you'd be running a nuclear power plant probably, and not a computer. But yeah, anything's possible. So yeah, 32-bit system, 64-bit system. No, there are pros and cons, but mainly because the system resources, the drain upon that is so much less with a 32-bit system. It enables other things to run, such as multi-recording without lag and things like that. So your latency could actually in effect be that much lower, and maybe in some respects just the way the music sounds generally, I don't know, you'd have to let me know what you think on that. I'd like to hear what you think about the difference between the different platforms being 64-bit or 128-bit or whatever bit rate you're running your system at, and have you actually noticed any difference in the way the music sounds, or are you struggling to keep your resources? Can you multi-record 16 tracks, 24 tracks, simultaneous audio, at what bit depth, at what rate, at what sample rate, things like that, that the system is limited to, before you start to get glitches and things that obviously make it impossible for you to record your music and use it in the way that I suppose most musicians want to use it, as a standard tape recorder to capture audio. But then there's those that rely more upon programs and sequencing, and therefore they have to use samples and how much fidelity is in those samples. Is it 96 kilohertz? Is it 192 kilohertz? You know, which is really, really nice. You know, a lot of the top studios, they're all running the 320 kilohertz and beyond, because they understand that the liaison problem, where the higher frequencies especially, which creates the sparkle, if you will, the high sounding quality fidelity at lower volume levels, those high frequencies, 15 kilohertz and above, obviously have much more samples to represent them. So it's starting to look more like a natural sine wave or whatever the waveform was. But usually in nature, we find sine waves, and the way that obviously sound works and the vibrations are much more natural. So obviously that's why they prefer that type of fidelity. Then you've got things like AD, analog to digital converters, which literally are separate boxes outside of the computer that obviously convert what is recorded either going in or out, at higher fidelity, because they manipulate the bit stream, the bit depth rate, on the higher frequencies. Therefore, they can actually put more processing power into recreating the high frequencies. However, you still come back down to, is it being played on a CD, which then reduces that resolution? It's great on the digital masters, but is that then translated to what the consumer gets? Well, there's a lot of techniques and processing that goes into making it sound great, but usually it's a lot of ducking of the high frequencies in order to make them pleasant sounding. Like in the old days, you would tend to have hi-hats quite loud because the drum is quite loud and the hi-hat is being played by a drummer. But in more modern cases, because music is actually finding itself in a digital format, the way that it's mixed specifically for digital might be different than for analog systems. And again, it all depends on your preference, whether that's the kind of system that you want to run. But I find that this works adequately for me, and I'm still getting more out of this system. The more you work on something, because you improve your techniques and things like that, and you find that you can actually get a lot more out of these things than you thought possible. So yeah, hopefully it's been a long video, that me just mainly talking rather than showing you any repairs. But obviously these things do matter when you're deciding on what computer system to run your music and your media on. Obviously if you was buying today, you go with what's current. But if you have had success in the past with something that was stable, then you know, when it kind of breaks down, as all things do, or needs an upgrade, then you know, recycle where you can. And you know, there's plenty of parts out there for you to buy. I'm not going to tell you where, because I'm not being sponsored by anybody. I just thought that people who may still have this type of computer might find this information useful, because like I say, there's nowhere else that talks about specifically this model, which is the HP Pavilion t3255 UK Tower Pentium D 820 with 2.8 gigahertz CPU and 1 gigabyte memory. And it used to have 320 gigabytes hard drive, but I'm now going to upgrade them both to 2 terabytes each. Because it's XP, its limit is 2 terabytes. That's all it can. That's the maximum it can read, because of how it calculates up to 32-bit. So that should still be ample, because it was running 320 gigabytes and it's still not full. But I just like to have the extra room, you know, because we're intending to do a lot more music in the future. So yeah, thanks for listening to that, and hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye.